They won't listen to me.
They will listen to me, Mom. Your Honor, I have evidence that will exonerate my mother.
Proceed, counselor. These documents prove the fraud. She is innocent. The charges are dropped. She is free to go.
You saved me. I love you, Mom.
My dear, you've grown so strong.
You saved me. Now it's my turn. Your Honor, I have evidence to clear her name.
Proceed, counselor.
This empire was built on integrity, not fraud.
Thank you.
You are my greatest legacy.
A black billionaire adopted a homeless girl. 20 years later, she entered court and saved his empire. The day the gavel almost fell. The courtroom was full by 8 in the morning. Photographers pressed against the wooden railings. Reporters whispered into recorders. Attorneys shuffled papers with the practiced calm of people who had already decided how the day would end. The air smelled of wood polish and ambition, the specific combination that fills rooms where powerful people are about to lose everything. Celeste Hargrove sat at the defendant's table with her hands folded in her lap. She was 65 years old, and she looked every bit of it. Not in the way people mean when they say that unkindly, but in the way of a woman who had lived hard and chosen not to hide it. Her white hair was swept into soft waves that rested on her shoulders. Her pantsuit was ivory, tailored, spotless. Diamond earrings caught the morning light. A single strand of pearls rested at her collarbone, and on both her wrists, catching that same morning light, were handcuffs. Steel on skin, silver against ivory. The contrast was not lost on anyone in that room. She did not look down at them. She did not look ashamed. She sat the way she had always sat. Straight spine, chin level, eyes forward. Because Celeste Hargrove had built $1 billion empire from a single flower stall on the south side of Atlanta, and she had not done that by letting anyone see her break. But her eyes were wet. Not because of the charges, not because of the cameras. Not because Reginald Voss, her late husband's nephew, a man she had never trusted and never hidden that distrust from, sat 2 tables away looking at her with the expression of a man who had already cashed the check. She was crying because today, of all days, she was thinking about a little girl with a gap in her front teeth and mud on her sneakers, and the most serious eyes Celeste had ever seen on a child. A little girl who used to fall asleep on the couch with a library book open on her chest. A little girl who called her mum, like it was the easiest word in the world, like it had always been true. A little girl she had lost and never stopped looking for. All rise. The bailiff's voice filled the room. Judge Harlan Prescott entered from the side door, a tall man, silver-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who has seen every kind of human theater and is no longer impressed by any of it. He settled into his chair, arranged his papers, looked once around the room with flat, careful eyes. Be seated. The room sat. Celeste's attorney, a good man named Bernard Okafor, who had represented her for 11 years, leaned close to her ear. "Stay steady," he murmured. "We're not done." She nodded, just barely. He didn't look convinced. Neither was she. The case against Celeste Hargrove had been built over 14 months. 14 months of financial forensics, 14 months of depositions and subpoenas and sealed documents and press leaks that were never proven but never stopped. 14 months of Reginald Voss sitting in boardrooms and interview chairs and charity galas, telling anyone who would listen that his uncle's widow had defrauded the Hargrove family trust, had siphoned funds, redirected assets, manipulated legal filings, all to consolidate control of Hargrove Industries before the family could contest the estate. The story had weight because Reginald told it well. He was 51 and smooth. He wore his grief like a well-fitted jacket. He said things like, "My uncle deserved better," and "I'm doing this for the legacy," in a voice that trembled just enough, just in the right places. The press loved him. The public, by and large, believed him, because the story fit a shape people recognize. A wealthy widow, a contested estate, a family left out. It was the kind of story that travels fast and far, and by the time the nuances might have slowed it down, it had already become received truth in the way that early stories do. Celeste had watched it happen without surprise. She had grown up in a world that was quick to assign certain women to certain roles, and she knew that no amount of track record would protect her from the narrative Reginald was building. She had built Hargrove Industries from a regional supplier to a national force. She had sat on 3 non-profit boards, She had been, for 19 years, exactly the kind of wife that people called Theodore Hargrove lucky to have, and Theodore, to his lasting credit, had agreed out loud and often. None of it mattered now. Narrative is faster than fact. Celeste had given no interviews. Bernard had advised against it, and she had agreed. Not because she was afraid of questions, but because she had spent 40 years learning that some rooms are not changed by words. Some rooms are only changed by evidence. She just needed more time to find it. Time, it turned out, had run out. The prosecuting attorney was a woman named Sylvia Drake. Compact, precise, the kind of focus that reads as cold, until you understand she simply does not waste motion. She stood now at the center of the floor, a single folder open in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, "the state is prepared to present its closing summary. The evidence is clear and substantial." Celeste Hargrove, over a period of no less than 6 years, executed a systematic scheme to redirect trust assets valued at over $200 million into personal accounts and shell entities bearing her sole authority. She paused. Let the number settle into the room. She did this while her husband lay dying. She continued after his death, and she obstructed every attempt by the rightful heirs to audit the trust. Reginald Voss, at his table, bowed his head. The gesture was so perfectly measured that Celeste almost wanted to applaud. Almost. "The defense has had ample time," Sylvia Drake continued. "The defense has produced no credible counter-evidence. The defense has offered no witness, no document, no testimony that meaningfully disputes our findings." She closed the folder. "We ask the court to proceed." Judge Prescott looked across the room at Bernard. Bernard stood. He was 60 years old and had the patient gravity of a man who chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. "Your Honor, the defense is still awaiting a critical set of financial records from a third-party institution, records that we believe will fundamentally alter the court's understanding of these transactions. We are requesting a brief continuance." "Mr. Okafor." The judge's voice was quiet, not unkind, just final. "This is the 4th time the defense has made that request." "I understand that, Your Honor. You've had 14 months. The room was very still. Bernard sat down. Celeste felt his hand briefly cover hers, under the table, and then withdraw. She kept her eyes on the judge. She kept her face composed. She thought about the little girl with the mud on her sneakers, and she breathed. Judge Prescott removed his glasses. He set them on the bench with a small, precise click that somehow carried through the entire room. "In 41 years on this bench," he said, "I have presided over cases that tested my faith in the law and cases that restored it. I have also presided over cases where the facts were simply the facts, and no amount of patience or goodwill could alter them." He looked at Celeste directly. She looked back. Neither of them flinched. "Before this court moves to verdict," he said, "is there anything further the defense wishes to enter into?" The doors opened, not the side door, not the small door behind the clerk's station. The main doors, the tall, heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom, opened with the kind of sound that turns heads without announcing itself. Every head turned. A woman stood in the doorway. She was young, late 20s maybe. Her suit was navy blue, her blouse white, her hair pulled back from a face that was utterly calm. She carried a large folder under one arm. Across its cover, in bold black text, one word was printed: evidence. She walked forward. Her heels were quiet on the polished floor. Her eyes were fixed on the front of the room, not on the judge, not on the attorneys, not on the press, on Celeste. The room had gone so silent that the sound of Reginald Voss's pen rolling off his table and hitting the floor seemed almost loud. The young woman stopped at the bar. "My name is Amara Whitfield," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, and carried without effort to every corner of the room. "I am an attorney licensed in the state of Georgia and 3 federal jurisdictions. I am also—" She paused. Not for effect, just to breathe. "I am also the adopted daughter of Celeste Hargrove." The room erupted. Celeste made a sound, not a word, not exactly, something that came from somewhere deeper than language. She pressed both hands, still cuffed together, to her mouth. Tears ran down her face. Across the room, Reginald Voss had gone the color of chalk, and Judge Prescott raised his gavel, not to silence the room, not yet, just held it, suspended, waiting to see what the next 60 seconds would bring into his courtroom. The gavel had not fallen yet, but the ground had already shifted. The night she found her. 20 years earlier, Atlanta had one of its mean winters. Not the kind that makes the news. No blizzards, no ice storms. Just that particular southern cold that settles in wet and stubborn and gets into everything. The kind that doesn't care how many layers you're wearing because it finds the gaps anyway. The kind that is especially cruel to anyone sleeping outside. Celeste Hargrove was 45 years old that November, and she was not yet a billionaire. She was a woman with 3 flower shops, a decent car, a house she had worked 12 years to own outright, and a marriage to Theodore Hargrove that was 2 years old and still improbably wonderful. She was driving home late from closing the Midtown shop. It was past 10. The rain had started an hour before and was still coming down in that thin, determined way. That means it plans to stay through the night. She almost didn't see the child. She was at a red light on Prior Street, window fogged, heat on, and movement caught the edge of her headlights, small, low to the ground, pressed into the recessed doorway of a closed drugstore. Celeste looked. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. She was wearing a jacket that was too big, an adult's jacket, the sleeves folded back multiple times and still covering her hands, and sneakers that were soaked through. She had her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were open, watching the street with an expression that was not afraid exactly, more like watchful, like a small animal that has learned the difference between a threat and something that isn't, but keeps checking just to be sure. The light turned green. Celeste did not move. The car behind her honked. She pulled forward 3 car lengths, then pulled over to the curb, turned on her hazards and got out in the rain. "Hey," she said, crouching down to the girl's level. "Hey, sweetheart." The girl looked at her, said nothing. "Are you okay?" "Nothing." "What's your name?" The girl thought about it for a moment, like she was deciding whether the question was safe to answer. "Amara," she said. Her voice was smaller than she was. "Amara." Celeste repeated it gently. "That's a beautiful name. Do you know what it means?" Amara shook her head. "It means grace, eternal grace." Celeste sat back on her heels. The rain was soaking through her coat now. She didn't care. "Where are your parents, Amara?" The girl looked away down the street at nothing specific, and in that look and in the particular flatness of it, the practiced distance, Celeste understood more than any answer would have told her. "Okay," she said. "Are you hungry?" A pause, then a nod. "Come on." She stood and held out her hand. "I know a place that's open late. They make the best hot chocolate in Atlanta. Real hot chocolate, not the powder kind." Amara looked at the hand, then at Celeste's face. She was doing the calculation, the one children in her situation learn to do very young, the assessment of whether a person means harm or help, whether the warmth in a voice is real or a performance. She decided. She took the hand. The diner on Capitol Avenue was small and bright and smelled of coffee and griddle grease and warmth. Celeste got a booth in the back and watched Amara eat 2 bowls of oatmeal, a grilled cheese, a side of fruit, and a large hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Amara ate carefully. Not frantically, the way people expect hungry children to eat. Methodically. Like she had learned not to rush things that might disappear. Between bites, Celeste learned pieces of a story. Mother gone. 2 years, maybe more. Amara wasn't sure of time the way adults are. Father, unknown. A foster placement that hadn't worked. An aunt who had tried and then stopped trying. A shelter on the east side that she'd left because a man had looked at her a certain way. And Amara, 8 years old, had known enough to trust that feeling and leave. She had been on her own for 4 days, in November, in the rain. Celeste kept her face very calm and her hands very still, and felt something happen in her chest that she had no words for. Something that was not pity. Pity is a thing you feel looking down. This was different, this was level. "You're very brave," Celeste said. Amara looked up from her oatmeal. People say that when they don't know what else to say. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a real one. "You're right, I'm sorry." She folded her hands on the table. "You're also very smart, and you're going to be okay. I don't know exactly how yet, but you are." "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to make sure of it." Amara studied her with those serious eyes, deep brown, careful, ancient in a child's face. "Why?" she asked. Celeste thought about it honestly. "Because I was supposed to find you tonight," she said. "I don't know why else I would have looked." The adoption was not simple. Nothing about it was simple. There were calls to Child Protective Services that night, and forms and temporary placement, and more forms, and a caseworker named Denise who was overworked but genuinely kind, and court dates and home evaluations, and months of supervised visits during which Amara sat in Celeste's living room and read library books and ate the snacks Celeste left out, and gradually began to leave her coat by the door instead of keeping it on. Theodore helped. He was patient with the paperwork, and patient with the girl who sometimes went very quiet without warning. He fixed the spare room with a bookshelf that went floor to ceiling and filled it with books he thought an 8-year-old might love. When Amara saw it, she stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "This is mine." "All of it," Theodore said. She turned and began reading the spines, not looking at him, not looking at Celeste, just reading the spines with the focused joy of someone who has been given something they didn't dare ask for. Theodore looked at Celeste across the hallway. Neither of them said anything. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday in April. Amara wore a yellow dress she had picked out herself. When the judge asked if she understood what was happening today, she said, "Yes. It means she's my mom for real." The judge said, "That's right." Amara said, "It was already true. This is just the paperwork." The room laughed. Even the judge. Celeste cried in the car. She didn't want to cry in front of Amara and undermine the dignity of the moment, so she held it until they were in the parking garage, and then she cried in the front seat with her hands over her face while Amara patted her arm in a businesslike fashion and said, "It's okay, Mom." I already knew. Then Theodore got sick, and after Theodore died, a slow, dignified, painful death, the Hargrove family arrived. Reginald Voss had never liked Celeste. He had never pretended to. He came to the funeral and said the right things, and stayed exactly long enough to be above reproach. And 3 months later, the letters from his attorneys began. The letters said, in the careful language of legal threat, that the family had concerns about the trust. That they intended to review. Celeste handed the letters to Bernard and said, "He's going to make trouble." Bernard said, "I know." "I've been prepared since the day I married into money," she said. "I just didn't think it would come from family." She was wrong about that last part. It always comes from family. The night it happened, the night Amara was taken from her, Celeste had not seen it coming. Amara was 19, home from her first year at Howard. She was happy in the way of young people who have found the exact right place for themselves. She talked about her professors. She talked about mock trial. She talked about constitutional law with the same intensity she had once brought to reading spines off a shelf. Then Reginald appeared at the door, not alone. With 2 men Celeste didn't recognize and a county official who carried a folder and would not meet Celeste's eyes. They had papers. The papers said a complaint had been filed, that there were concerns, that Amara, who was still 2 months from 18, needed to be interviewed separately. Later, Celeste's attorney would establish that the complaint was filed under a false name. Later, he would establish that Reginald's fingerprints were all over it. Later, too late. Amara stood in the hallway with her coat in her hands, looking at Celeste with those serious eyes. "Mom," she said. "It's okay," Celeste said. "This is a mistake. I'll fix it. I know you will." She walked out the door. And Celeste, who had faced down suppliers who cheated her, bankers who underestimated her, grief and illness and loneliness, stood in the hallway and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely helpless. The lawyers fought. For months they fought. And Celeste received one phone call, from a number she didn't recognize, and a voice she barely recognized because it was older and tighter than she remembered, and it said, "I know what they did. I'm going to fix it." Then the call ended. Then, nothing. For 20 years, the doors of the courtroom were open. A young woman in a navy suit had said her name, and Celeste Hargrove, who had not let herself hope in 20 years, was hoping now. What she carried. The room did not quiet on its own. Judge Prescott brought the gavel down, once hard, and the sharp crack of it cut through the noise, the way a single gunshot cuts through a crowd, not silencing it instantly, but fracturing it. People pulled back from the edges of their voices. Reporters lowered their recorders, then raised them again more carefully. The photographers kept shooting, the flashes kept going. The judge didn't stop them. "Order," he said. Then, when the room had settled to a low hum, "Order." He looked at the young woman standing at the bar. She had not moved during the eruption, had not turned around to face the room, had not raised her voice, had not adjusted her expression. She simply stood, folder under her arm, eyes on Celeste, like she had been standing in exactly this spot, in exactly this way, for her entire life, and was simply waiting for the noise to catch up with her. "Miss," Judge Prescott said, "you've identified yourself as Amara Whitfield. You've stated you are an attorney and the adopted daughter of the defendant." "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you here in a legal capacity?" "I am." She reached into the folder and withdrew a single document, then walked it to the clerk without being asked. "My bar credentials and a motion for emergency intervention, Your Honor. I am filing as co-counsel for the defense. Bernard Okafor, who had practiced law for 32 years and prided himself on never being the most surprised person in a room, turned in his chair and looked at her with undisguised astonishment. Amara met his eyes briefly. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. "Mr. Okafor," she said, "I've read every brief you filed. You did good work with what you had." "With what I had," he repeated. "Yes." She set the folder on the defense table. "You didn't have what I have." Sylvia Drake, for the prosecution, was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We are at closing. The defense has had 14 months. "I'm aware of the timeline, Miss Drake," the judge said. He was reading the motion. His face gave nothing away, but he was reading it carefully, the kind of reading that means the words are doing something, landing somewhere, finding purchase. "Give me a moment." Drake sat. She sat the way people sit when they are confident but not entirely comfortable, controlled, precise, watchful. Reginald Voss leaned toward his own attorney, a man named Fletcher Crane, who had the expensive haircut and cautious eyes of someone billing by the hour on a case he'd been told was already won. Reginald murmured something. Fletcher murmured back. Neither of them looked at Amara directly, which was itself a kind of looking. Celeste had not taken her eyes off her daughter. 20 years. The word kept cycling through her, not as thought, but as something physical. A pressure in the chest, a warmth behind the eyes. 20 years. The gap-toothed girl who had stood in the doorway reading book spines. The child who had said, "It was already true, this is just the paperwork," in a Georgia courtroom, while a judge tried not to smile. The 19-year-old who had walked out the door with her coat in her hands and her chin level, and had said, "I know you will." She was 28 now. She was beautiful and serious, and standing in a courtroom like she had been built for exactly this. And she had, Celeste realized. She had been. Not because Celeste had shaped her, but because Amara had always been this. The 8-year-old doing the calculation at the rainy doorway, the teenager arguing constitutional law at the dinner table, the girl who ran track not because she was fast, but because she liked clarity. She had always known how things actually worked, and apparently now she had the evidence to prove it. "Miss Whitfield," the judge said, setting the motion down. "This is extraordinary." "Yes, Your Honor. Walk me through it, briefly." Amara stepped forward. She did not consult notes. She did not look down at the folder. The financial forensics presented by the prosecution were conducted using a subset of the Hargrove Trust's transaction records, she said, a subset that was provided to investigators by the Trust's third-party administrator, a firm called Meridian Financial Group. "We are aware of Meridian," the judge said. Yes, Your Honor. What the court may not be aware of is that Meridian Financial Group was acquired 14 months ago, 2 weeks before the formal complaint against my mother was filed, by a holding company called Voss Capital Partners. The room did something that was not quite a gasp and not quite silence, something in between, the particular collective breath of people recalibrating. The records provided to investigators, Amara continued at the same steady pace, were not complete. 43 transactions were omitted. Those 43 transactions, when examined in full context, do not show diversion of funds. They show a series of internal trust restructurings that were authorized, documented, and signed by Theodore Hargrove himself, 6 months before his death. Restructurings that were, in fact, specifically designed to protect the trust from bad faith contestation. She paused. Theodore Hargrove saw this coming, she said. He protected my mother. The records that prove it were buried by the company that was paid to keep them. Fletcher Crane was on his feet. Your Honor, these are unverified allegations from a woman who has just walked into this courtroom with no prior notice. Verified, Amara said, without raising her voice or turning to look at him. The 43 transactions are documented in a parallel set of records held by a secondary institution, First Coastal Trust Bank, Savannah Branch, where Theodore Hargrove maintained a backup archive specifically for this purpose. Those records were subpoenaed by my office 8 days ago. She withdrew a second document from the folder and walked it to the clerk. The subpoena response, Your Honor. Certified. Time-stamped. 43 transactions. Fully documented. Crane sat down. He didn't do it dramatically. He simply sat, the way a man sits when the floor of an argument has collapsed under him and he is trying to make the fall look like a choice. Reginald Voss did not sit. He was very still. His hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at nothing, not at Amara, not at Celeste, not at the judge, at the middle distance. The look of a man doing arithmetic that is coming out very badly. Your Honor, Sylvia Drake said. She had stood again. Her voice was careful. She was a good prosecutor, and good prosecutors don't defend positions after the ground shifts. They reassess. If these documents are what Ms. Whitfield represents them to be, the state would, obviously, need time to review. Obviously, the judge said. There was something dry in it. Not unkind, just honest. I would also note, Drake said, that the state was provided its investigative materials by Meridian. If those materials were incomplete, that is a matter the state takes seriously. It was not an apology, but it was a prosecutor beginning to back away from a case, the particular retreat of someone who was lied to and does not intend to be held responsible for the lie. Judge Prescott looked at the folder on the defense table. He looked at Amara. He looked at Celeste. Celeste was still looking at her daughter. She had not moved, she had not spoken. She sat with her hands still in her lap, still cuffed, still silver against ivory, and she looked at the young woman who had walked in from nowhere with 20 years of silence behind her and the truth in a folder under her arm. And she thought, she did it. She actually did it. I told her I would fix it, and she fixed it herself. The pride of it was almost unbearable. The grief of the 20 years that sat inside the pride was worse. Both of them at once. That was the specific ache of being a mother. Joy and loss at the same time, woven together so tightly you cannot find the seam. This court, Judge Prescott said, will recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. At that time we will reconvene to review the newly submitted materials. All parties are instructed not to leave the jurisdiction. He looked at Fletcher Crane. Including your client, Counselor. Crane nodded once tight. Reginald Voss finally looked up. He looked at Amara. She looked back. She did not smile. She did not threaten. She just looked at him with those dark, careful eyes, the same eyes that had done the calculation in a rainy doorway 20 years ago. And then she turned away, because he wasn't the point. A bailiff moved toward Celeste with a key. The handcuffs came off. Celeste brought her wrists to her chest and held them there for a moment, not rubbing them, not looking at them, just holding. She looked up. Amara was 3 feet away. For a moment, neither of them moved. 20 years of distance and silence and longing compressed into 3 feet of polished courtroom floor, and neither of them moved, because there is a kind of moment that is too large to rush into. Then Celeste stood, and Amara crossed the 3 feet, and they held each other in the middle of that courtroom while cameras flashed and reporters typed and Reginald Voss looked anywhere else, held each other the way people hold on when they are making up for time, which is to say desperately, completely, with both arms and no reservation. "Mum," Amara said, into her shoulder, like an exhale, like she'd been holding it in for 20 years and could finally let it go. "I know," Celeste said. "I know, baby. I know." The gavel had not fallen, and tomorrow everything would change. Before the morning. The hotel room was on the 14th floor, and through its window Atlanta stretched in every direction under a night sky that couldn't quite decide between clear and clouded. Celeste sat on the edge of the bed with her shoes off and her hands in her lap, and her eyes on the city she had built her life in. She wasn't sleeping. She had ordered room service, Bernard had insisted, and the food sat mostly untouched on the cart by the window. She had drunk her coffee. That was something. Amara sat in the armchair across from her with her legs tucked under her and a legal pad on her knee, writing. She had been writing for 40 minutes. Every few minutes she would pause, tap the pen against the pad, and then write again. She had removed her suit jacket. She was in her white blouse and her slacks, and her hair was still in its bun, though some of it had come loose in the way that long days do to carefully constructed things. She looked, Celeste thought, exactly like herself. Older, more precise, weathered in the specific way that people who have worked very hard for a very long time are weathered, not worn down, but refined. All unnecessary softness burned away until what's left is exactly what was always there. "You need to eat," Celeste said. "I'll eat," Amara said without looking up. "You said that 20 minutes ago." "I meant it both times." She paused, tapped the pen. "I need to walk you through what happens tomorrow so you're not surprised by anything in that courtroom. Can you focus for a little while longer?" Amara. "Mum." "I can focus. I've been focusing for 14 months. Celeste leaned back slightly against the headboard. "I'm looking at you. That's where my focus is." Amara did look up then. And something happened in her face. A brief unguarding. A flash of the child she had been. There and gone before either of them could remark on it. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." Then she looked back at the legal pad. "Okay," she said. Tomorrow. Amara had not found the evidence by accident. She had been looking for it, specifically, methodically, with the patience of someone who had been given a very long time to think, for 11 years. She told Celeste this quietly, between the night and the legal pad, while the city glittered below them. She talked in the precise, spare way she had always talked about things that mattered to her, without embellishment and without apology. And Celeste listened the way she had always listened to Amara, without interrupting, without flinching. After the separation, Amara had not stopped. The county interview had led to a new placement, which had led to another, but Amara was 19 and 3 months from her birthday, and she had fought her own paperwork with the specific ferocity of someone who had been through the system once and understood exactly which levers to pull. She was legally independent within 90 days. She enrolled at Howard on her own. Her scholarship held. She worked nights. She did not contact Celeste, not because she didn't want to, but because she had understood something very early. Reginald Voss had resources and reach, and any contact she made could be used, could be monitored, could be turned into something it wasn't. The one phone call had been a risk she'd calculated and accepted. Everything after that had to be invisible. So she was invisible. She studied law. She clerked. She joined a firm in Washington that specialized in financial fraud. Not by coincidence, not by passion for financial fraud in the abstract, but because it was the specific field where she needed to become expert, where the knowledge she would eventually need lived. She built the case in her off hours. For 11 years, she tracked the acquisition of Meridian Financial. She identified the backup archive at First Coastal Trust Bank a detail Theodore Hargrove had buried in a single line of a single codicil that required reading his entire estate filing, twice, carefully, to find. She contacted the bank. She waited. She built relationships with investigators at the Georgia Attorney General's office, who, it turned out, had their own quiet concerns about Reginald Voss that predated the Hargrove case entirely. She waited for the right moment. The right moment, it turned out, was 3 days before the closing arguments, when Bernard Okafor filed his 4th continuance request and the judge denied it, which meant the window was closing, which meant it was time. "You cut it very close," Celeste said. "I know. If the judge had proceeded this morning, he didn't. Amara." "I know." She set the legal pad down. "I timed it as closely as I could afford to. I needed them to think they had won. A man who thinks he's already won gets comfortable. A comfortable man makes mistakes." She paused. "Reginald made 3. I documented all of them. Tomorrow the court will see all 3. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "You are terrifying," she said. "You know that." Amara allowed herself a small, precise smile. "I learned from someone who was terrifying first." There were things they did not say that night. They were both aware of them. The 20 years that sat between the airport hug and the legal pad, the lost Christmases and graduations and ordinary Tuesday evenings that could not be recovered. The grief of it was real, and they were both too honest to pretend otherwise. But they were also both, in their different ways, practical people. People who understood that the past is the past in the literal sense. It cannot be entered, it cannot be revised, it can only be carried or set down. And there is a time for carrying it, and a time for setting it down, and this night, the night before a fight, was not the time. So they talked about tomorrow. They talked about the 3 pieces of evidence Amara had assembled, the acquisition documents proving Reginald's ownership of Meridian, the 43 transactions from First Coastal, with Theodore's authorization signature on every one, and the third thing, the thing Amara had saved for last, the thing she mentioned quietly, almost carefully, the way you mention something that changes everything. "There's also a recording," she said. Celeste looked at her. "Theodore," Amara said. "He recorded himself, 6 months before he died. A video. His attorney has held it in sealed escrow since his death, with instructions to release it only under specific legal conditions. Those conditions were met when Bernard filed for the continuance and was denied. The attorney released it to me this morning." The room was very still. "What does he say?" Celeste asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Amara looked at her mother, this woman she had chosen, who had chosen her on a rainy night 23 years ago on a street in Atlanta. And her own voice, when she spoke, was the quietest it had been all evening. "He says he loves you," she said. "He says he saw what was coming. He says he made sure you would be protected, and he says—" She stopped, cleared her throat, looked at her hands. "He says he hopes Amara is still in your life, because the 2 of you together were the best thing he ever saw." Celeste closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long time. When she opened them, Amara had moved from the armchair and was sitting beside her on the bed, and they were not talking anymore, and the legal pad was on the floor. And the city outside the window was still there, still glittering, still vast and indifferent and theirs. At some point they both slept. In the morning, Amara was already dressed when Celeste woke, suit pressed, hair rebuilt, legal pad covered in notes, the folder with the evidence stacked neatly on the table by the door. She had ordered breakfast, real breakfast. She made Celeste eat all of it. "You need to be sharp," she said. "I'm always sharp." "Sharper, then." Celeste ate. She watched her daughter reorganize documents with the focused efficiency of someone who has rehearsed this morning in her mind 1,000 times. She thought about the little girl on the rainy doorstep. She thought about the bookshelf. She thought about Theodore's voice, which she had not heard in 8 years, saying things she had not known he had said, had been waiting all this time in a sealed envelope in an attorney's office for exactly the right moment to be heard. "Amara," she said. Thank you." Amara looked up from the documents. She held her mother's gaze for a moment, Those same serious dark eyes, doing the calculation, finding the answer. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me after." She picked up the folder. "Let's go." The courtroom doors opened at 9 o'clock. This time they were ready. What the room learned. The courtroom filled faster on the second morning. Word had moved overnight, in threads and shares and screenshots of screenshots, and the public gallery was standing room by 8:45. Reporters who hadn't covered the case the day before were suddenly very interested. Celeste walked in at 5 minutes to 9. No handcuffs. She wore charcoal grey, pearl necklace, her wedding ring. She sat at the defense table and waited. Amara came in behind her. Bernard took the right. Between the three of them, the defense table had a quality it had lacked for 14 months: direction, the particular gravity of people who know what they are about to do. Reginald Voss came in with Fletcher Crane and 2 additional attorneys he had not had yesterday. He sat heavily, with the look of a man who had made a great many phone calls the night before and received answers he did not want. At 9 o'clock, Judge Prescott entered. "All rise." The room rose. "Be seated." The room sat. "This court has reviewed the materials submitted yesterday," the judge said. "The court has also been in contact overnight with the Georgia Attorney General's office, which has confirmed an ongoing investigation into Meridian Financial Group and its parent company, Voss Capital Partners." Fletcher Crane's pen stopped moving on his legal pad. "The court finds that the 43 transactions submitted by the defense were material to the central charges and were not included in the original investigative record. This court does not assign blame to the prosecution. The state has cooperated fully. However, the implications of the omission are significant. The defense's request to present the newly submitted evidence in full is granted." Amara stood. Celeste could see immediately that this room fit her, the way water fits a glass, not forced, exactly occupying the space designed for it. She began with the acquisition documents, laid it out plainly. Reginald Voss, the holding company, the timing, but 14 months ago, 2 weeks before the complaint was filed. She didn't editorialize. The timeline was the argument. She moved to the 43 transactions, walking the court through them in clusters by purpose. Restructuring for tax efficiency, for estate protection, specifically designed to create documentation barriers against bad faith contestation. Every cluster authorized. Every cluster signed by Theodore Hargrove himself, 6 months before his death, while fully cogent and legally competent, as attested by 2 independent physicians. Then she said, "There is also a video." The courtroom had a screen mounted to the side wall. The clerk brought it online. The lights dimmed slightly and the room went very quiet. Theodore Hargrove appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study, bookshelves behind him, afternoon light at his left. He was thinner than Celeste remembered from health, but his eyes were the same, that warmth in them, present and attentive, like he was always actually listening. He spoke for 7 minutes. He spoke about the trust, clearly, legally, in the precise language of a man who had worked with his attorney to get every word right. He spoke about Reginald by name, without malice, with the plain directness of a man who does not have time left for euphemism. He said, "My nephew has made his intentions clear to me. I have structured this trust to protect my wife and what we built together. Any claim that she acted against the trust's interests is false. I am saying so here now, so the record is unambiguous." He paused. He looked directly into the camera. "I also want to say something about Amara," he said. Celeste made a sound, small, involuntary. "Amara came to us as a little girl, and she became our daughter in every sense that matters. What happened to separate her from Celeste was wrong, and I was not able to stop it, and I will regret that for whatever time I have left." He paused. "But I know Amara. I know what she does with things that are wrong." A small, quiet smile. "If you are watching this, she found it. She found the record. I always knew she would. I built the archive for her. I just had to trust that she'd know where to look." "Take care of each other," he said. "I love you both very much." The screen went dark. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Celeste had both hands pressed over her mouth. Amara sat beside her, completely still, looking at the dark screen with an expression that was not crying, not exactly, but carried the same weight. Then Judge Prescott said quietly, "Thank you, Ms. Whitfield." What happened after that was fast, not in a chaotic way, but in the way of things that have been waiting to resolve and are finally allowed to. The judge spoke at length. He spoke about the integrity of the evidence record. He spoke about the role of Meridian Financial in the investigation. He used the phrase, "fundamental compromise of the evidentiary foundation," in a tone that left no ambiguity about what it meant. He dismissed the charges against Celeste Hargrove, not reduced. Not continued, dismissed. He also referred the matter of Meridian's conduct and Reginald Voss's acquisition and its timing to the Georgia Attorney General, formally on the record, and noted that the AG's office had already indicated its interest. Fletcher Crane leaned toward Reginald. Whatever he said was short. Reginald nodded once. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked for one moment in Celeste's direction, and whatever he found in her face made him look away again almost immediately. Two attorneys from the AG's office, who had been sitting in the gallery and who Amara had known would be there, approached Reginald as he reached the aisle. Celeste watched them speak to him. She watched the color leave his face. She watched him nod. She did not feel triumph. She had expected to feel triumph, had imagined it in 14 months of depositions and press leaks and late nights. But what she actually felt was quieter than that. More like the specific relief of a weight you've been carrying so long, you'd forgotten it was a weight. The moment when it's set down and you feel in its absence how much it cost you. The gallery was loud when they stood, not in anger. In the particular loud of people who have witnessed something true, not a performance of truth, not a version of it, but the real thing, unwrapped in front of them under morning light in a Georgia courtroom. Celeste stood. She turned. Amara was right there. "You said thank you after," Amara said, the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth. The closest to teasing she had probably come all week. Celeste laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has been very serious for a very long time and has suddenly, without warning, remembered that laughter is a thing that exists. It shook through her and she pulled Amara toward her and held her. This time it was different from the day before. Yesterday had been relief, sudden and breathtaking. This was something else. This was settled. This was after. "Thank you," Celeste said into her daughter's hair. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Bernard was shaking someone's hand across the room. Sylvia Drake caught Amara's eye and gave a single brief nod, the nod of a professional who has just seen something done properly and chooses to acknowledge it, even when it wasn't her side that did it. Amara nodded back. They had lunch at a diner, not a restaurant, not a place where anyone would recognize them. A booth in the back, the kind of place that smells of coffee and griddle grease and warmth. Celeste ordered hot chocolate. Amara looked at her. "Real hot chocolate," Celeste said, "not the powder kind." Something moved across Amara's face. Recognition, memory, the specific emotion that has no clean name but sits somewhere between joy and grief and gratitude. She looked at her menu for a moment. Then she set it down. "Do you know what Amara means?" she asked. "Eternal grace," Celeste said. "You told me that on the worst night of my life," Amara said. "In the rain, on a street I didn't know, to a person I had just met." She looked up. "I have thought about that a lot, about what it takes to say something like that to a child you don't know, to just decide." "It wasn't a decision," Celeste said. "It was recognition." Amara was quiet. "I saw you," Celeste said simply. "That's all. I just saw you." Outside the diner window, Atlanta went about its business, loud and fast and indifferent the way cities are, the way cities have always been. Traffic and voices and the specific noise of a place that does not stop for anything, including the things that deserve to be stopped for. They sat in the booth and drank their hot chocolate and talked, not about the case, not about the future, not about anything requiring resolution, just talked. The way people who have found each other again talk, carefully at first, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. until they remember that the silence between them is comfortable too, and they can rest in it without explanation. At some point, Amara said, "I'm not going anywhere." She said it the way she said things that were already decided. Celeste looked at her daughter across the table. This woman built from that girl, from that rainy night, from a bookshelf and an April courtroom and 20 years of invisible, patient, relentless love, and said, "I know, baby, I know. Some things cannot be taken, not by money, not by time, not by men who mistake power for permanence. What is real persists, what is chosen holds, and grace, eternal grace, finds its way home." End.